Please welcome Lara O'Brien.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to everybody that Jonathan already thanked. It's such an honor to be asked to be a speaker here at Creative Mornings, and even more so that you're here to spend a little bit of your morning hearing my thoughts on fantasy, as well as kind of my journey and experience in the world of ballet. So first, before I got going, I kind of wanted to just take a quick poll on how many of you have been to a ballet before. You've seen a ballet. Wow, that's awesome. That's a really good amount. Are there any of you who haven't been to a ballet before? Which is perfectly okay too. Okay, great. Well, that's going to change today, actually. And then is there anybody, this is kind of another one I'm going to throw out there, that you think you might have been to the ballet, you're not quite sure, you might have seen something that was movement and music put together, but not what you were expecting? Okay, so it seems like everybody's in either one camp or the other. You've seen ballet or haven't seen ballet, but I sincerely ask that because a lot of times people's experiences with ballet aren't exactly what they expect. It's something different than what they were thinking it was. And ballet is quite innovative and powerful and sexy and also delicate and ethereal and all these things. So, but I kind of wanted to bring that up because you might be more familiar with the world of ballet than you even realize. For instance, I imagine most of you, if you haven't seen this movie, you probably at least know what it is. This was a blockbuster that came out a couple years ago, Black Swan. And then anyone who is a Taylor Swift fan, perhaps you've seen this music video, Shake It Off. And then most of you probably know these two characters from Sex and the City, Carrie Bradshaw and Alexander Petrovsky. So of these three examples, those first two are not exactly the representations of the ballet world that I'm a part of or that I'm familiar with, but this third one is, and that might be kind of deceiving because there's not a tutu that appears in this photo, even though Carrie Bradshaw does wear a tutu in the opening credits of Sex and the City, for those of you that have seen it. But this guy here on the right, Alexander Petrovsky, he really does represent the world of ballet because he actually is Mikhail Baryshnikov. And Mikhail Baryshnikov is a Russian dancer. He defected to Canada in the 1970s and went on to become a ballet star, both in the States and all around the world. He was absolutely an incredible performer and has gone on to be a pretty successful actor since then. And most of that is because not only was he incredibly talented in his technique and in his dancing, but he was a performer. He knew how to take an audience on a journey. He sucked people into when he was on stage, and that's kind of why he's gotten so much success moving on from dancing and in acting. And in thinking about that, that was kind of what drew me to the idea of that's what we do. That's what ballet dancers do, is we create these worlds, we create these fantasies, we create these escapes for people, we draw them into these new worlds. And as I was thinking about that, there's some words that my boss, the artistic director of Carolina Ballet, says pretty often about his first experience of when he went to see a ballet. He was a child and his parents took him to see the Nutcracker, and his memory of it is saying that the lights went down, the curtain went up, and I was transported to another world. And that kind of captures like all of it for me, is that is really what we are in the business of doing, is for that 2 hours or even that 15 minutes, it's transporting people to another world and creating a new experience for them during that time. So. With that, there's something about ballet, though, that it's meant to be experienced more than it is talked about, and even though I have more to say about it here today, I wanted to be able to add that element for you here this morning, is to be able to experience a little bit of ballet. And so I actually brought 8 of my colleagues to come and dance for you. So they're going to come and get set up. They're going to perform, yes. This is kind of earlier than we normally get going dancing. They are so awesome to be here to create this for you. And they're going to perform an excerpt from a ballet called Carmina Burana, which Carolina Ballet will be performing beginning next week, all of Thanksgiving week. And those cards that were on your chairs give you a discount to go and see the whole performance. But this is just the very beginning. It's choreographed by Lynn Taylor Corbett, the music of Carl Orff. And as they're kind of finishing up getting set, I'm just going to bring you into another little piece of trivia about our dance world, which is that before we perform, dancers don't say good luck to each other, and they certainly don't say break a leg to each other. But we do have something that we do say to each other, and that is merd. That is what we say to each other before we perform. So right before the curtain goes up, you'll hear merd flying around all backstage. Merd, merd, we write it in cards to each other and give each other merd gifts. And for those of you that aren't maybe current on your French, merd means shit. So that's what we say. So now that they're ready and they're ready to perform, of course, we have to say to them, 1, 2, 3, merd. Awesome, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Yes, thank you for that huge round of applause. I'm really, really grateful to these guys for coming out here this morning earlier than normally we would get started dancing to do that, because I really just felt like there's so much greater of an impact to experience ballet in that way versus just for me to stand here and talk about it, that, you know, what this piece would be like. And it goes back to that. It's that we're in the business of creating these experiences, and they're not always what you imagine. I don't know if that's kind of what you imagine when you think about ballet, but that is one of our ballets. So in our business, what we do, creating these experiences, creating other worlds, I kind of narrowed down like 4 pieces of the process of doing that I've discovered for myself in kind of my journey through this world, and they are craft, commitment, collaboration, and courage. So I'm going to kick it off with craft first. And ballet is essentially a craft of meticulous, consistent, constant physical conditioning. And the way that we do that as ballet dancers is we take a ballet class every single day. It's how we start our days, 90 minutes of not necessarily preparing for our performances or rehearsing, but just going back to the fundamental basics of our discipline. Pliés, tendus, pirouettes, grand jetés, doing them over and over and over, just repetition and repetition and repetition. it's practical, it helps us warm up for the day, but it actually becomes just a bit of a ritual. And for me, this ritual of being in this craft and being in this practice began when I was 8 years old, actually. That's me on the right, and that is when I started my craft of ballet. That's when I started attending ballet classes. I started learning the ballet positions, I started learning the ballet steps, and it didn't start out creating this whole world of fantasy, and it didn't start out creating this whole other world, as most things, don't in the very beginning, but it did start with just gaining this appreciation and this entrance into this world of practicing. And it clearly didn't start out with a clear path at this point. If you had asked me at this age if I was going to be a ballerina when I grew up, I probably would have said no, I didn't know. But this is when it started. And it started with 1 class a week, and then 2 ballet classes a week, and then 4 ballet classes a week, and then a couple of recitals, and I started to get that taste of what it is to be on stage and to perform, and I just started to fall in love with dancing and fall in love with the craft of ballet. And luckily, I actually started to get better at it too. And by the time I was about 13, 14, I did know that this was what I wanted to do. I did know that I wanted to be a ballerina. I wanted to dance professionally. And in high school, I was taking up to 3 or 4 ballet classes a day, dancing 4 to 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. So with that level of discipline and dedication at such a young age, everything kind of revolved around that for me, and my schooling and everything included. And when I was 17, I left home. I moved to New York City to attend a prestigious ballet school there, and basically just continued to take more and more ballet classes. So by the time I was 19, I was hired by Carolina Ballet. I had achieved the dream of becoming a professional dancer and moved to Raleigh. And I had already had 11 years of experience, or 11 years of training to start my career. And I've now danced with Carolina Ballet for 15 and a half years, and it didn't stop there. You don't graduate from taking ballet class. Each one of those days of those 15 and a half years begins with ballet class. So ballet is a craft, it is a practice, and the practice never ends. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Malcolm Gladwell's theory of the 10,000 hour rule, that it takes 10,000 hours of practicing something to gain mastery in it. Well, by quick calculation, having started when I was 8, I'm somewhere in between like 40 and 50,000 hours of practice in my craft at this point. And he also makes a point in that theory that elites, when they reach that 10,000 above level, the practice just kind of becomes the essence of it, and that's kind of what it is. So even today, well, probably not today because I'm here, but I still take ballet class every day. And even right now, I'm 6 months pregnant. I'm actually on a leave of absence from performing, but I still go and I take ballet class just about as often as I can. And so did this guy. This is back to Mikhail Baryshnikov, one of the most legendary ballet dancers of all time. It didn't mean that he didn't need to take class anymore. He was the best ballet dancer of all time because he took class every day. And those years that I was living in New York, he had retired from dancing at that point, but I would still see him in ballet class. So it becomes a ritual of your life. And so for a question for you, what are the fundamentals of your craft, and how can you give yourself a class to hone them every day? That might not necessarily be appropriate for what you do. You might not need to visit them on a daily basis, and you might not need to go back to the basics, but maybe there are some benefits of that. So if craft is the foundation of what we build on, the next step is commitment. And a couple of weeks ago, I was at a middle school giving a talk on being a ballerina and kind of the life of a ballet dancer. And during the Q&A, a little girl raised her hand and asked me, so what about the days that you just don't feel like it? What do you do then? And I thought that was just like a brilliant question. Because there are plenty of days that I think being a ballet dancer is a dream. It's been a dream job, but there are days that I don't want to get up and go to ballet class. There just absolutely are. And there are a lot of other things about ballet. Business Insider called being a ballet dancer numbered it number 11 on the list of 14 most stressful jobs in America. And that's based on high pressure situations, high competition, physical pain, low pay, low job security. And ballet does take a huge physical toll. We dance up to 7.5 hours a day. We're dancing until 10:30 at night when we're performing. We're exhausted. it takes a huge stress on your body, your joints, ligaments, tendons, muscles. Ballet kind of pushes all of those things to the extreme. So yes, there are days that you don't feel like going to ballet class. And sometimes, I will admit, the only thing that gets me there is kind of like the fear of failure, like that I have to be there and that I have to just keep going. But for long-term success, even though that's a great motivator in the short term, fear, long-term success doesn't really lend itself to that, and you need a kind of more empowered context for how you're going to break through on those days. And so I've identified 3 things that work really great for me, which the first one is called a personal charter. A personal charter is kind of like a personal mission statement that for me has always been useful in taking the time to actually write out. And it evolves for me over the years and it changes. Currently it's to make a living, sharing moments of joy, freedom, and magic with others while having fun doing it. And I think about everything that I do in my life and it all aligns with this, whether I'm performing on stage or whether I'm teaching the little kids at the school that I own, it's all aligned with to make a living, sharing moments of joy, freedom, and magic with others while having fun doing it. So to be able to have something like that you've written out for yourself, that you can re-presence and fall back on to remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing when you would, if you wanted to, just like ice your feet and watch a movie. Another one that I use, this one is actually probably my favorite, is note cards. I stole this from an Olympic athlete who was talking about how he kind of pushes through performance pressure at the Olympics. And basically, there's these 5 places that I'll put 5 of them, 1 on my bedside table, 1 in my bathroom mirror, 1 in my refrigerator, 1 in my car, and 1 in my wallet. And what you write on the note cards is kind of a forward-thinking objective. So when I'm taking on a new role that is really challenging or that I really don't think I can do, or when I was on the brink of opening a business, I write it out as if it's already happened. I have a few of them here. I always use neon because it just catches my eye. Sorry. And so a couple examples, these are kind of funny and I'm kind of embarrassed to read them out loud, but I am a butterfly. I jump with ease. I turn with gumption. I feel calm and happy when I hear the waltz of the flowers music. I'm confident with each pique I take on stage. Just things like that kind of reinforce that it's almost like it already exists, even when it really doesn't exist for you yet. And every time you visit one of those places, which is many times a day, you read that out to yourself and it becomes this reinforcement. And it works. It's pushed me through so many of those challenges. And the last one that I use is kind of personal mantras, like little coaching statements. And a few years ago, similarly, when I was taking on a new role that I didn't think I was going to be able to master, I came across a quote, and I don't have the source of the quote, but it went something like this. When you think you're at full capacity, remember that you're actually just full of capacity. And this particular role has 5 different entrances, and I had made it through the first 4, and I was standing in the wings, and my legs were completely numb, and I was exhausted, and my lungs were burning, and I was really kind of like hunched over, and I didn't know how I was going to get back on stage to do the last entrance. And that last quote kind of popped up in my mind, and I sat there, and I kept saying, full of capacity, full of capacity, full of capacity. And it became almost like it's been a hashtag on some of the photos that my colleagues post. It's become kind of like this little personal mantra that just like pulls you through. So having things like that to fall back on, I have many, but this is kind of one of my favorites, are those things that kind of shift your mindset from pulling you towards other things that might feel very real, like your physical exhaustion or however else you might be feeling, keeps you clear on your commitment. So what tools will remind you of your commitment, what you're up to? Beyond that, we move on to collaboration. Now, ballet is super special in the sense that it combines so many of the visual arts. Every time we're dancing on stage, most likely we're dancing with other people. There are times that we're on stage doing solos, but whether it's one person and I'm doing Romeo and Juliet pas de deux, or whether we're dancing on stage with the whole company, you're always dancing with others. You're always creating that world together. Similarly, we work with choreographers. We create so much new work at Carolina Ballet that we're always working with people and bringing their vision to life. So that's an incredibly collaborative process as well, to be the medium of a choreographer's vision and to help them kind of flush that out and bring that to the stage. Sets. Talk about creating another world of fantasy. I mean, curtain goes up and you sort of see this whole other environment that moves and shifts. This one is from the Nutcracker. That Christmas tree grows from being about 10 or 11 feet tall to being 30 feet tall, and this whole other kind of world opens up. Sets are incredibly powerful for creating fantasy, as is lighting. Lighting is actually kind of one of the key things, even though it's kind of one of the invisible things. And then sometimes it's none of that. A lot of times we do ballets with just a blank stage and a backdrop, which we call a scrim. And that even creates a whole different experience and a whole different world. Costume designers, of course, creating characters and allowing us to move as we dance. There's such a different variety that we can have as we're, the costumes creating what we're doing on stage. And then one of the most important pieces that I think is very collaborative about ballet is actually you. It's the audience. I always consider that as one of the biggest pieces in creating a production, because we can do all that work and all that preparation and create this whole thing and we can put it on the stage, but if nobody comes to see it, then it really has no impact. So an audience really makes it come alive. It's a very symbiotic relationship, and believe me, when you're a dancer on stage, you can feel the energy of the audience that's out there. It's an incredibly special thing. So all of that comes together quite seamlessly and beautifully, actually. And here's just a little visual of it. So again, what are all the elements that you can bring together in creating your projects? And then who's your audience? Who are you sucking in? Who are you bringing on a journey with you as you're doing it? And always keeping those things in mind as well. Another thing that I've learned through my world of ballet. And last, we get to courage. Because like I said, you can do all of that. You can spend all those years practicing and you can create all that collaboration and all that creation, and there still comes a point when you're standing in the wing on the brink of the stage, in this case with a GoPro on your head, and you still have to step out there and get twirled upside down under lights in front of hundreds, if not thousands of people, and that really takes something. In my opinion, it takes a lot of courage. And this is a kind of a representation of just one of my absolute favorite places. It's just a very special moment to be standing in the wings. It's the invisible line between reality and fantasy, because once you step on that stage, you really are in a whole another world. And it really kind of takes something to do that, to throw your hat over the wall and to kind of jump off that cliff and to go out there and to make yourself that vulnerable. And but it's absolutely exhilarating. And when it does happen and when you do kind of put everything into it, something even more magical happens, which is that you're not just creating the fantasy for other people that are there, but you actually become it. And a lot of people talk about that experience of flow, where time kind of stands still and kind of moves really fast and everything is sort of just exactly as it's meant to be. And I have another word for that. I call it abandon. And being on stage is like being in a state of abandon where you're kind of in your body, but you're out of your body, and you're kind of aware that there's hundreds of people watching you, but you're kind of in your own world at the same time, and it's absolutely magical, and it's totally special. And it could be for just a few minutes. Some ballets are only 5-6 minutes long. Some ballets are 2.5 hours long. But whichever it is, it's always going to end. Ballets always end. It's a live art. It's ephemeral. It happens in the moment. It's created with those people in that moment, and then it's done. And there's one last special ritual that I want to share that we always complete that experience with, and we call it reverence. And again, during those years of training, it's something that you do at the end of every ballet class. When you're a professional, you do it at the end of every performance, and it's also known as a bow. And it's very, very special, because in that moment when the curtain goes back out and you come out to bow, I kind of feel like that's the break back from fantasy to reality. I always feel like I'm kind of back out there as myself again. And it's a gesture of kind of acknowledgement and gratitude for the people that were there to see it, the people that you created it with, and the art and the craft itself. And so just to bow in front of an audience and also have the opportunity to receive that appreciation back is just incredibly special. So it's another ritual that I pass along to the kids that I teach at tutu school. We do it in a really special way where we take hands at the end of every ballet class. We bow 3 times. The first one we say, thank you for the music. The second one we say, thank you for the dancing. And the last time we whisper, thank you for the magic. It's just very special. So with that, thank you. Thank you.
That was beautiful and inspirational. We have time for a couple of questions. Wow, I'm blown away. What question? Go ahead,
So if you get kind of placed in a company after school, is it almost like a residency in a match program? How does it work?
Well, I'm not that familiar with what a residency to match program is, but it happens usually by audition, which you might have seen in, where you kind of literally wear like a number and they come in kind of like cuts and all these things. In my case, it happened where I happened to just be dancing in a ballet class in New York, and Ricky Weiss, the director of Carolina Ballet, saw me there and offered me the job. And then it is based on contract. You sign a contract for a season or for a year, and then that's reevaluated every year. I've been with Carolina Ballet for 15 years, so I really kind of feel like it's my artistic home now, and I plan on kind of staying with the company till I retire. But I don't know, is that similar? I'm not sure. No? Okay. It's always done kind of by audition process, whether that's a dancer coming to a company and kind of, displaying themselves, like showing themselves off, or whether you go to kind of a mass audition where everybody's kind of putting themselves out there, and that way that's kind of how you get a job as a ballet dancer. Yeah. Yeah.
In talking about collaboration,
Yeah.
I'm trying to equate it to other jobs that the folks within this group do.
Sure.
It's interesting, especially thinking about your role both with choreographer and the musicians in that, because if the choreographer is going in saying, "This is what I want to have happen," or the person, the conductor is saying, "This is how the music is going. This is how I'm interpreting the music as you go through." Can you speak a little bit to that line between kind of being a vessel, a medium, versus being part of that decision making?
Absolutely. So kind of like you spoke to, sometimes ballets are choreographed to scores that are already completed or were completed even hundreds of years ago. So that music is set. Sometimes when there's repeats in the music, we can make some calls on whether or not we cut the repeat or something like that. Conductor's always going to get to make up how fast you're going to do it, but we really kind of work with them and what works best for displaying the choreography, and they try to work with us on that. But then there is the unique case where music is actually commissioned for particular pieces, and we had that happen recently. This last spring we did a full-length Macbeth, and the artistic director and the composer, Mark Scarce, actually sat down together and mapped out, scene by scene, what they were going to be trying to say, what part of the story was going to be told, how long it should be, how many dancers were going to be involved, and the composer used all of that to actually create the music based on that. So it really was completely collaborative in that sense, and helped kind of dictate and bring to life how the ballet was going to be created. So that really lends itself to that kind of opportunity to really dictate that. But scores that are already completed, you want to kind of preserve as they are and just use them as that kind of inspiration for how the choreography takes shape. Does that kind of answer your question?
I guess I'm more focused kind of at your role specifically in that.
Okay.
In a way, you're the final part, right? You're the part that the audience actually does.
Sure.
And so are there places where you're talking to a choreographer and saying, I don't mean to step on your art, but maybe this is not the best thing for us to do here?
Yeah, and choreographers, I've worked with a bunch of different ones, and most of them have been really great in terms of saying, this step is really not comfortable, or this step is a little too fast for this moment. And a lot of times they'll, listen to that and they'll work with you. So I do get a lot of say in that process, and that's kind of what working with a choreographer does allow a lot of collaboration, absolutely. Sometimes choreographers push you though. They're like, I think you can do it. I think you just need to work on it. And so then you are kind of pushed to do things a little bit beyond what you might think is possible. Now you're right. I mean, when I get out there on stage, I could really do anything I kind of want to. And there is a little bit of play. I don't go completely off the books. I still stick to the choreography, but you do get to synchronize the music a little bit, or syncopate it, or perform it a little faster. I mean, there is always a little bit of play, and that's where a dancer really gets to develop their own artistry and their own choices on stage with how they're gonna express that and bring the music to life. So yeah.
So you called Raleigh your creative, artistic home, and I'm just curious, like, coming from a place like New York and being here for such a long time, what are the things about Raleigh that have made it a place where you want to continue performing and creating?
From the time I moved here in 2001, and those first couple of years were actually really kind of rough, because I'm originally from Chicago, and then yes, I lived in New York for a few years, and when I moved here, it was 2001, I was like, where am I? And but part of what's been beautiful about being here for that period of time and being involved in the artistic community is feeling like I'm a part of that culture developing, and seeing that evolve over the 15 years that I've been here has been exciting to feel like I'm actually like I'm part of being that. Like, I brought myself here to bring my art here to be a part of that developing. And so to see it developing, as I'm sure we all have and do, in the way that it is really special. And I still want to continue. I mean, I'm committed to being here now and continuing to sort of see our community grow in that way, and hopefully continue to draw people into the arts and to participate in them, whether it's literally participate or just as observers. Just to be able to be involved in the arts, I think, is so important. So, yeah. Yes.
Who are your biggest inspirations outside of ballet?
Oh gosh, good one, Elise. Biggest inspirations outside of ballet. Oh goodness. Maya Angelou. There are some writers, and other like world leaders like. Like Gandhi. I mean, there's certainly things like that, like just people that create that world of peace for people that create, in their own ways, create other things being possible. They're artists in themselves. But that's a tough question. I'm kind of, pregnancy brain is getting the best of me on that one, but those are at least two of them. But yes.
How do you have time to own a school and to dance and company?
You just make it. You make your own time, and you make people a part of the process too. I don't run my school without a lot of help, but it was one of the challenges that I faced in making the choice and the decision to open a school while I'm still actively performing. But I felt it was worthwhile. It would make a difference. It would fulfill my life in a new way, and it was worth doing sooner rather than later. But it does get stressful sometimes, and it does, owning your own business. I'm sure many of you are, familiar with entrepreneurship. One of the best pieces of advice I got was, yes, you get to make your own hours, but sometimes those hours are, 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, or 5 to 8 on a Sunday, or otherwise hours that you would normally want to be sleeping or doing something else. And sometimes it does take that. It just takes fitting it in. But again, going back to those points that I talked about, like personal charter and those things that are really important to me, that's what keeps that willingness to do that kind of alive for me. So, yeah.
Can you describe a little bit of the process of creating a character, like an iconic, well-known character like Lady Macbeth?
Yeah. So Lady Macbeth, which is one that, like I spoke about, we premiered last spring, that took a ton of research. I mean, I read the play probably hundreds of times, and I read her scenes thousands of times. And it also was very collaborative in the sense that I talked to a lot of people about it. I got a lot of different perspectives. I watched all the films out there that I could of Lady Macbeth. I watched interviews of actresses that have played her. I really just kind of soaked in all these different perspectives. And I also worked really closely with the choreographer and with the composer on what their vision for her was. And then I just got to play in the studio. I just got to make choices and kind of ask people's opinion, like, does that work and does that read and is it that powerful? And then still, I kind of kept doing that even on stage. Like, you get it down to a formula, but then on stage, magical things happen, and in a moment you might just decide to kind of play it a little bit differently because you become so familiar with what that character is. So yeah, I mean, there is a lot of research that goes into it, and there is a lot of time that I just spent like marinating on it, and then it just becomes playful. Starting in the studio and then on the stage, you just make choices and try different things. Yeah.
We've got one more.
Okay.
We'll take one more
Yes.
question.
choreograph your own dance and dance on stage?
I have not taken on choreography, but yes, a lot of dancers that I've worked with have chosen to go that route and do feel very inspired to create dances, and a lot of times we do perform them on stage. At Tutu School, I have gotten to create little dances for some of my students, things like that, but nothing large scale. And I don't know if I will. I don't know if I, kind of have the desire to create in that way. I kind of like, doing it, being choreographed on more than I like creating it. But I will say I almost always, if I'm listening to a piece of music or I'm even listening to a pop song, I'm always dancing in my head. Like there's always steps that are just so obvious. It's kind of like I've heard hairstylists say that they can't help just like always judge someone's hairstyle. It's just like in their blood. It's what they do. And so for me, I'm always kind of dancing. Like it's always kind of right there for me. But I don't know if I'd ever actually get in the studio and work with dancers on actually creating a piece. It just might not be my draw. But yeah, good question. Yeah.
All right, so with Thanksgiving coming up, I just want to thank a couple of people. I want to thank Gab and Cam for giving us our theater. I want to thank all of you for being here, part of this event. You are what makes this event special. And last, I just want to thank Lara. I feel like we've all seen something really special here today, so thank you so much for all the time and energy put into it. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing your fantasy world with us. So, Lara,
Thank you.
Thank you.